Faith Community Church. This is Jason Wick. We are continuing our walk through the New Testament. Today we are in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. And here we see Paul talking to the Corinthian church, and he is just warning them and using the story of the Israelite people and the history of the Israelite people and saying, look, they had so much going for them. He says that their ancestors were under the cloud, like they're being led through the wilderness by the very presence of God. God's presence was directing them out of Egypt and into the promised land. They passed through the Red Sea, and just the miracle to be able to see that happening. They're baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They ate the same spiritual food. There's manna from heaven coming. They're getting water from the rock. Paul reveals that they're being led by Christ himself through the wilderness. And so they have just so many blessings. And I think maybe the Corinthian church that Paul's writing to in 1 Corinthians, they were very blessed as well. All right, so this is church that's sort of at the apex of pagan idolatry in Corinth. Paul comes and plants a church, and so they're under the great apostle Paul. Paul spent a lot of time with them. He's helping build the foundation of the church. He continues to go back to this church, and so they had a lot of things going for them, just like the Israelites had a lot of things going for them in the book of Exodus. And Paul is just saying, look, let's learn from their mistakes, right? They had a lot of good things going for them, but they made a lot of mistakes. Let's learn from those mistakes. And we, now 2,000 years after Paul writes to the Corinthian church, can also learn from their mistakes. And so what did the Israelites fall into? Chapter 10, verse 7 says, do not become idolaters as some of them were. Right? The Israelites are well-known idolaters, and so they like to have gods like the other nations. At one point we see they took all their jewelry, they melted it down, and they created a golden calf to worship. And the Corinthian church, their idols looked different. And even for us today, the idols that we have look different. We idolize, maybe it's entertainment, right? And as soon as we get home, we can't wait to flip on the television or pull up our computer, or look on our phone to just immerse ourselves in an amusement. We want to turn our brains off, and we want to go to this, and this is like our salvation at the end of a hard day. Like, I can't wait to get home, and I can't wait to just sit back and just veg out on the couch, become a couch potato, and do that. Or maybe we have the idols of money, right? And we look to money as, this is our security, this is my protection, this is what brings me joy, and we idolize that. And just like Paul's warning the Corinthian church not to fall into idolatry, we also can't fall into idolatry. And so I think some of us, just because we don't take our jewelry and melt it down into the shape of some animal or creature, that we think like, oh, we've got idolatry in check. But the reality is we idolize so many things. We have a television show called American Idol, right? We call those who excel at sports idols. Or maybe in the business world, we look at great CEOs and builders of businesses and companies, and we idolize them. It's become such a part of our culture that it's even woven itself deep into just how we communicate with each other. So Paul warns the Corinthian church, and he warns us not to fall into idolatry. We saw from the history of the Israelites, this doesn't end good. This doesn't end well. And so we cannot fall into that danger as well. He also says, do not commit sexual immorality as some of them did. And so this is a struggle, from the beginning. Like, sexual immorality is something that grips most every culture, if not all cultures. And so we saw with the Israelites, we see it with the Corinthian church, we see earlier in the book of Corinthians just some sexual immorality that's taking place. And we don't have to look very far to see sexual immorality taking place even in our culture. And so we have to be on guard against this, and not just like the big sexual immorality, right? Not just the, propositioning prostitutes or having affairs or, doing these sort of extreme examples of it. But Paul wants us to guard against any form of sexual immorality. And so that might be just watching what we watch, what we listen to, what our eyes see, what we allow into our house, the clothes that we wear, the thoughts that we allow in our mind. We have to take those thoughts captive and make sure that we are not falling into idolatry, and we're not following the bad example of the Israelite people. And we also see that they tested Christ. We also cannot do that. We cannot allow ourselves to take that step where we're sort of putting Christ on trial. We're putting God on trial and becoming like, even another example of Job, who is, sort of testing God and questioning him. And why do you do these things? Why do you allow these things? Instead, we have to have that faith and that trust. And the last one that I want to touch on is we can't grumble. Right? This is something that the Israelites did all the time. It's something that Paul warned against to the Corinthian church, and it's something that we cannot allow ourselves to participate in. And there's a difference between grumbling, and there's a difference between desiring to see change. Right? I think grumbling is very passive, and we just sit there and we mope and we moan, and I wish that someone would come and fix this. And there are times where we see something that's out of line in our lives, and we can say, you know what? Instead of grumbling, instead of just being passive and hoping someone else comes in and fixes this, I'm going to take some ownership, and I'm gonna fix it. But that's not what flows naturally for a lot of us. A lot of us like to sit back and grumble and say, I don't know whose fault this is, but it's someone that's not my fault, and someone needs to come fix it. Someone else needs to come and provide a solution. This isn't fair. This isn't right. And we just sort of sit back like the Israelites and grumble. And we see that the punishment for the Israelites for each of these was severe, right? When they committed a sexual immorality, it says in verse 8 that 23,000 people died. When they tested Christ, some of them died and were destroyed by snakes. When they grumbled, some of them were killed by the destroyer. And these things happen as examples. And so we can look at each of these and see, okay, maybe a little bit of entertainment and idolatry and just, getting caught up in worshiping some of these earthly things. What's wrong with wanting to see some security come from my money, or what's wrong with elevating these certain people to a almost godlike status? What's wrong with a little bit of sexual immorality and a little bit of watching something or doing something that maybe is a couple steps outside the bound? What's wrong with a little bit of testing God and questioning him? What's so bad about a little bit of complaining? Everybody does it. But we need to learn from the mistakes of the Israelites and learn that God takes these things very, very seriously, that he does not want us to fall victim to this. He has set us apart as his people, and we need to live as his people, holy and righteous in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation. And so that's my encouragement to you, is to learn from the mistakes of the Israelites, learn from the justice and the holiness of God, and as he punished those mistakes, and understand that God despises idolatry. He despises sexual immorality. He hates when he is tested and when we grumble and complain. And so instead of doing those things, let's walk in righteousness together. God bless, Faith. I'll see you soon.